Well, welcome, and thank you for attending the Great Books lectures here at Johnson County Community College. As always, before we start, we'd like to thank everybody who makes this possible. I'd like to thank the CoLab, marketing, our video services, everybody, including you. Several of you are returnees. You show up over and over, so thank you very much. This is the first of our spring semester, and we have a couple more coming up. We'll maybe get some information to you about later. And if you'd like to see any of the past lectures, you can find them on our YouTube page. To begin, Holly Manning is Associate Professor of Communication Studies here at Johnson County Community College. And she's taught here since 2019. She holds a bachelor's in psychology from Hastings College and a master's in speech communication from Minnesota State University, Mankato. Mm-hmm. Her first teaching position was at Concordia College in Moorhead, Minnesota, and then at Minnesota State University, Moorhead. And prior to coming to JCCC, she was on faculty at Laramie County Community College in Cheyenne, Wyoming for 9 years. Much of her research is in online teaching and learning, speech anxiety, open educational resources, workplace communication, conflict management, and mediation. Mediation.
They're the
same thing. Yeah, they're the same thing. Her efforts here at the college have found her on OLAC, peer review committees, the Honors Advisory Committee, and she's taught multiple sections of Honors Public Speaking, as well as her other teaching duties in communications. When she is not teaching, which is a lot, you will probably find Holly being a dog mom to Rocky, a self-proclaimed foodie, an amateur chef, baker, and barista, a researcher of the most random things, a true crime podcast lover, an audiobook enthusiast, a Kansas City Chiefs fangirl, a KC explorer, and a travel buff. So that's quite a list. Yeah. Today's presentation covers Susan Cain's 2012 book, Quiet, The Power of Introverts in a World That Can't Stop Talking. Holly told us that she is not an introvert, and I'm not exactly sure we needed her to tell us that. If you know her, you get it. About the book, though, she said, quote, "This book came into my life at a time when I was being asked to serve on a lot of hiring committees. It was also a time when my partner, an introvert, was interviewing for management positions. I struggled with how to communicate and navigate my own dissonance that the showiest candidate might not be the best, but also teaching my speech students and working with my partner to put themselves out there so they can be heard in the workplace. This book gave me more perspective, understanding, and empathy for folks who aren't like me. It gave me the language to better navigate difficult conversations on hiring committees and different teaching strategies to engage and work with my introverted students." Well, that's pretty grand.
Yeah.
Friends, Holly Manning.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Michael, for the introduction. Thank you to Maureen and Michael for doing these. I also need to thank my partner, who I have probably talked about this for so much, and she's been like, please stop. We need this to be done, like now. And so I think that, and my department, who also have heard about this for ages as well. And I do need to do a shout out very quickly to my friend Kristen in Colorado, who is live streaming. I got many texts about it, so hi, Kristen. I am really excited to be here presenting today for Great Books. I think that this series is an incredibly important part to share, kind of, for me at least, how I use this to sort of change my perspective as a teacher and as a partner, family member, and friend. As a public speaking teacher, I'm feeling a little anxious. So I'm feeling a lot of empathy for my students right now. I have several here, so here we go. Hi, friends. But as I tell my students, once you get started, everything feels a little bit better, so we'll just kind of get going. The book I am talking about today is Quiet, The Power of Introverts in a World That Can't Stop Talking. And as Michael has said, and I will again reiterate, I am not an introvert. I'm technically what is known as an ambivert. While I do sometimes need to have the quiet, I, however, recharge and reset and re-energize by having people around. I would venture to guess that most of my colleagues, my friends, my family would put me very solidly into the extrovert camp, however. I think that I'm most known as being very outgoing, but I do really sometimes not want to ever leave my house, and so that's okay. It is funny when I started telling people about this event and the book that I chose, I got a lot of looks like, you're talking about introvert? Okay, like do your thing, whatever. But if you'll notice, a lot of the hobbies that Michael listed of mine, my hobbies and interests, are actually rather introverted interests. Books, podcasts. I do love a lot of those more quiet things as well as being social. I do feel that, like many extroverts that I've talked to, that my introversion has come out more during and post-COVID, as during that time I think I learned to appreciate quiet more and learned to actually sit with myself more, and then didn't have as much opportunity for the noise. This book, as Michael has said, was introduced to me shortly after it came out by my partner, the self-identified introvert. She was reading it, and I found it on the coffee table one day, and so I just started kind of thumbing through it. But what made me want to keep reading is that I identified with it. Not that I was the introvert in it, but I could see how so many of the people in my life were talked about in this book. It was my partner being passed up for promotions, or how introverts in interviews, were passed for someone who was deemed like a better fit, or they were more likable. I identified with the sections in the text about education because I was being pressed for making my students participate. And I would get frustrated sometimes with colleagues for not speaking up in meetings, even though I knew they had really good ideas to share. And this book gave me more perspective, the language and the history of perhaps why that was happening. It also told me that I, as a non-introvert, have the opportunity and responsibility to help shift that narrative. I'll start today, here's my preview of points, students. I will start today by giving some background on the author herself and lay some of the groundwork that the book gives us. I'm then going to dig into two of my greatest takeaways before ending with some wrap up and discussing where we can go from here. So first, some background on our author. This is Susan Cain. She is a former Wall Street lawyer and negotiations consultant who spent 7 years officially, and as she says, an entire lifetime unofficially, researching introversion. She's a self-described closet introvert and experienced firsthand the pressures of the extrovert ideal, which we will discuss later, during her time at Harvard Law. Cain's journey from a quiet child who loved reading and being alone to a high-powered attorney led her to realize that introverts truly do have a unique power in negotiation and leadership that is often not seen. She was her own first client, learning to embrace her reflective nature rather than trying to fix it. Cain wrote Quiet, The Power of Introverts in 2012, and then went on to present some very highly publicized TED Talks, like 50 million plus views of her TED Talks. As she was preparing, she actually went so far to hire an acting coach because her public speaking anxiety was so high. After giving almost 100 speeches in the year following Quiet's release, and because of her experiences, she actually created an online communication course for public speaking and communication for introverts. You can actually go to our website, enroll in it. It's actually pretty cool. In that course, she emphasizes authenticity over showmanship. And that is something that I have really dug into since reading the book. Cain has published 2 more books since. Quiet Power, which focuses on introverted teens and kids. Highly recommend for anyone raising children that may feel a little bit more introverted. And she also has written Bittersweet in 2022, which is about society's constant pressure about being positive and the toxic positivity ideals. If you cannot read them, watch the TED Talks, get the audiobook. They're all very good. Cain has been very successful in giving voice to a population that feels really underrepresented. And I'm excited to share how this book has shaped how I understand introversion and interact with introverts in my life. So before we really jump in, I want you to take a look here. And take note of how often you answer true or false to these statements. The more you answer true, the more introverted you are. The more you answer false, the more extroverted. And if you are fairly equal, you're a magical unicorn or an ambivert. I fall very, very consistently. Every time I take it, I am like exact equal. Even on like bad days where I'm like, obviously I'm more introverted. Nope, I'm still always very equal here. And I did pull this from the book itself, so you can take a look at, there's more questions and things there. There is no exact science to determine introversion and extroversion, and it is one of the most highly researched areas in psychology. But we do know that there are different types of introverts, and each has their own kind of strength. But we also know that those strengths are often overlooked in our classrooms, our workplace, and in social situations. Regardless of what makes someone introverted, depending on the study, it is noted that 1/3 to 1/2 of all Americans are introverted. So even if you aren't personally an introvert, you are likely raising one, working with, managing, teaching, friends with, or partnered to an introvert. So understanding how introverts experience the world is important to explore. One of Cain's main goals in Quiet was to clarify what introversion actually means. She states that there is a myth that introversion is often confused with shyness and social anxiety or lack of confidence and ability to lead. Shyness, she explains, is about the fear of social judgment, while introversion is actually more about the sensitivity to stimulation. Introverts can enjoy social interaction and actually can enjoy public speaking, but they tend to need to have the solitude to recharge. Extroverts, by contrast, gain that energy from interaction and external stimulation. And even as an ambivert, I still have a little public speaking anxiety. It's okay. Cain argues that these differences are not matters of willpower or skill, but they are rooted in how we are responding to the stimulation and that external reward. By talking about extroversion and introversion as a temperament rather than a personality choice, Cain is working to remove that judgment that we have of introverts and extroverts. Being introverted does not mean that someone is less capable or less ambitious, less engaged. And it just means that they're differently wired. What energizes one person can very easily overwhelm another, but it's neither response that is inherently better. So with some background of the author and some of the body of the work, I want to talk about my key takeaways and how I've experienced these takeaways in my own life. Have you ever wanted to participate in a conversation, but that conversation moved on before you were able to contribute to it? Even though I have said multiple times already that I am not a true introvert, there was a time that I was mistaken for one. I know, right? Can't believe it. That experience was really, really pivotal for me in understanding the quiet in the room and became a really crucial point for me as an educator. So now it's Holly's story time. About a month into my graduate program, so this was 2007, my advisor asked me to set an appointment with her to discuss my progress. Nervous about being called in for a one-on-one, I racked my brain about what I possibly could have done to get there. I thought my teaching was going well. I thought my grades were good. I was getting along with people, like there wasn't conflict. So I really had no idea why she would want to meet with me. I got there and I sat down, and Dr. Trinan asked me if I was struggling with the material in her theory class. And I said, no, like I'm fine, I get it, no problems. And she said, well, you aren't talking very much, and so I just thought maybe you were struggling. I wasn't struggling. I was quiet because everyone else was loud. Our cohort in 2007 was full of people that liked to talk and argue more than I did. And for the first time in my life, I truly was the quiet one in that sea of loud. I had things that I wanted to contribute to the discussion, but I couldn't find a way to break in and share it before that conversation moved to the next topic. I felt frustrated in that classroom because I had different perspectives. I didn't get a chance to share because I didn't have a way to break in. So I asked Dr. Trinan, okay, how do I break in? How do I become someone who's more participatory in that classroom? And she said, I don't know, just get louder. That didn't work, as you may imagine. So my introverts in the room, how many of you can relate to that? Being told, just get louder. I tell this story not for sympathy, but to really provide context for where I was as a 22-year-old. My quietness is being misunderstood for lack of understanding. And at this time, I was also trying to figure out who I wanted to be as a teacher and how I wanted to manage my own classroom. Does anyone remember the big breakthrough in education in 2007? I mean, it was like forever ago. Some of you might not have been born, I don't know, right? It was the rise of the flipped classroom. So while I was struggling to find my space to contribute and participate in class, I was being taught and encouraged to flip my classrooms, make my classrooms more participatory, more group work, more student-led discussions. Ask students to keep track of participation and assign participation grades, because that was all part of the flipped classroom model. I felt uncomfortable with it, but I really didn't know why, and I didn't have a true understanding of what was happening there. I didn't have any of the language to be able to truly vocalize my concerns, and I truly didn't know any better, because when I was in college, all of my classes were lecture. I sat, I took notes, I took tests, I left. And then I got to graduate school, and everything was seminar. I read, we talked, and that was it. I had no other model and no way to understand the dissonance that I was truly feeling in my classroom. Now, this is not a dig at the flipped classroom. I'm not digging on it at all. It has a lot of positives, but it does potentially penalize those students that are not comfortable speaking. It was 5 or so years into my teaching career when Quiet came out. And it finally gave me some understanding of how I felt as a student and gave me the language to be able to understand what it is that I was feeling. Not that the ideas of introversion and extroversion are new. I think we all have known that for as long as we can. But how Cain describes the introvert experience was the relatable and really impactful piece for me. In Quiet, Cain argues that introverted students are navigating environments that reward constant engagement. She states that in those academic settings, silence is interpreted as disengagement and lack of understanding, even though introverted students may be the brightest in the room and may be very deeply involved internally. She traces this bias to a historical shift in values that occurred early within the 20th century. Prior to this, success was associated with things like seriousness and integrity and moral discipline, but as America became industrialized and urbanized and everyone was moving into the city, things like personality became much more important. Charisma, charm, salesmanship became that of value. The culture of character gave way to that culture of personality, where being outgoing and persuasive were seen as successful and being quiet was seen as not. This shift laid the groundwork for what Cain calls the extrovert ideal. The belief that the best individuals are socially dominant and assertive. Over time, the ideal seeped into almost every single institution. In schools, we expected students to participate more. We expected them to be lively. We expect them to be outgoing. We expect them to be expressive. In workplaces, leaders were expected to be bold, charismatic, and she notes that we admire people who are comfortable in the spotlight, and we forget about those who are not. We often assume that that comfort signals competence. The problem, Cain says, is that that extrovert ideal turns temperament into a moral standard. Traits associated with introversion are not just undervalued, they're often interpreted as deficiencies. Quiet students are labeled as disengaged, sensitive, and quiet colleagues are often overlooked. Cain states that introversion, along with its cousins, seriousness and shyness, are now being considered second-class traits. But what makes the extrovert ideal especially powerful is how incredibly invisible it is. Most people don't think of themselves as biased towards introverts. Instead, that bias shows up in our everyday expectations. Who speaks first? Who gets rewarded for participation? Who does your upper management deem leadership material? Cain reminds us that there is zero correlation between being the best talker and having the best ideas. Yet, our systems always continue to reward those who are the loudest. Cain is careful to say that extroversion is not a problem. It's not the problem, I should say. It can be, but not. Extroverts bring the energy, they bring momentum to those, and they really do act as social glue, right? If there were no extroverts, I don't know how much would get done. So we do need to have a nice mix. The problem arises, though, is that when that extroversion becomes the norm rather than an option. So we are expecting everybody to be extroverted rather than an option to be. When everyone is expected to act extroverted, everything becomes a performance rather than something that is well thought out. We speak before we collaborate, or we speak before we're ready, or we collaborate before we're really ready to share ideas. And so sometimes we don't get to the best ideas, we just get to the most ideas. In academics, the extrovert ideal has especially high consequences because Cain argues that when participation is equated with speaking, we privilege that very narrow range of minds. Students who need time to process may internalize the belief that they are somehow less capable in the classroom, and over time, this shapes not only our classroom dynamics, but students' sense of who they are and who they are allowed to be. Cain does not suggest that introverted students avoid participation or anything like that. Cain does not suggest that classrooms eliminate discussions. Instead, she argues that educators need to just rethink on how, when, and how often they are used. She states that educators need to design classrooms where students can contribute in more than one way, and educators need to rethink what a good student looks like and to challenge ourselves to find multiple ways for students to find success within their classrooms. Essentially, Cain is asking us to just widen our definition of excellence. When we recognize that brilliance can be quiet and leadership can be restrained, engagement can also be invisible, we begin to design environments that are comfortable for all. She suggests that personality should be something that we design for, a lot like accessibility or learning styles, and not something that we design around. In my own classroom, I've taken these ideas and learned to give my students a bit more grace. I've completely eliminated any idea of participation points and tried to employ a little bit more of that think, pair, share mentality. Give students an opportunity to work on their own with a partner before we essentially speak in a large group. I also just want students to feel the ability to participate at their own comfort level. Sometimes my quiet students are the absolute first to raise their hand and answer a question. Sometimes they won't answer the question at all, and that's okay on either end. I, in short, just want students to feel like they are allowed to be where they want to be and feel like they belong in that classroom. Takeaway 2, the myth of the charismatic leadership. I want you to think about that best leader, boss, or colleague that you have ever had. What were they like? Were they quiet or were they loud? One of Cain's most controversial arguments in Quiet is that we often confuse charisma with leadership. In other words, we assume that the people who speak the best, the fastest, or the loudest must also be the best leaders. As Cain puts it, we value charisma over competence, and we often do not realize that we are actually doing it. Charisma becomes a kind of shortcut. So if someone sounds confident, we assume that they just know what they're talking about. What is interesting about this, and I'm looking at all my comm colleagues here, we tell our students to do this. Even if you're not feeling it, act like it. Just act like you're confident, because that audience is going to believe you. Cain warns, however, that confidence and insight don't always belong together. Charismatic leaders can energize the room, but they can also dominate it. When one voice fills a space, the others, often the quieter ones, get pushed out. Cain notes that group dynamics can forcefully silence an independent thinker. In those environments, leadership becomes a performance rather than a reflection. But Cain does not argue that introverts make better leaders than extroverts. She points to research showing that introverted leaders often thrive by working with proactive people because it gives them space to share their ideas and build a path forward, whereas extroverts are much more quick to put their stamp on things. Cain brings this idea to life through examples that challenge our stereotypes, like Gandhi, not a natural public speaker, incredibly uncomfortable with attention in his early life. Yet, we consider him to be one of the most influential leaders of all time. His power did not come from charisma in that usual sense. It came from his consistency, his patience, and his self-discipline. Cain reminds us that Gandhi led not by commanding attention, but by earning trust. She makes a similar point when discussing the Steves. She refers to the Steves, like in quotations, many times throughout the book. I don't know what her thing was with the Steves, but she really liked them. So she talks about the Steves here. Steve Jobs was famously charismatic. If you ever watched any of the Apple launch rollouts, I mean, it was wonderful. Very charismatic, master presenter, phenomenal storyteller. Steve Wozniak, by contrast, however, was very introverted and preferred working alone. The story of Apple is actually quite unique. She goes into it in depth in the book. So I suggest you kind of look at that if you haven't. Steve Jobs became the face of Apple. However, it was Wozniak's quiet brilliance behind the scenes that made the vision possible, noting that charisma amplified the message, but it did not actually create the innovation. Cain's concern isn't charisma itself, it's just that we rely on it. When we consistently reward the loudest voice, we risk overlooking leaders who will think carefully and listen deeply and act responsibly. I found this to be especially true in my own work and beyond my work in the classroom. As I grew into my position and as I gained more experience, I started taking on my own leadership roles and committee work. I began to really truly see that divide between the thinkers and the talkers. Now, I do argue that I am a thinker, even though I am a talker, so I don't think that they are mutually exclusive, Susan. Now, however, there is a big divide between the loud and the quiet, and that became very apparent. Sometime in early 2012, I was asked to serve on a search committee. I'm not going to go into all of the details, but there was an incredible pool of highly, highly qualified instructors. We put these folks through the ringer, full day of campus interviews, teaching demos with actual live students, like big things. If anyone's done that, you know how absolutely grueling that can be. And by the end of the day as a candidate, you really just never want to speak to anyone ever again. And so we really did put them through the ringer. Of the three, we had a very clear top two in that situation. One of the candidates was very, very thoughtful and a little bit more quiet. Candidate two, very outgoing, very animated. Both phenomenal in the classroom. Fantastic references. Everything about them was top notch. Candidate one had a few more years of experience and interviewed a little bit better. In our discussion after the campus visits, I was a little confused. My colleagues were talking about how much they liked candidate two, how exciting candidate two was, and how candidate two would be such a great fit. They were all in on candidate two. But I kept bringing up what they have less experience, and they did an interview as well. Can you guess who was offered the position? After lengthy discussion and back and forth, we forwarded candidate two and passed on candidate one. And it just did not sit right with me. But I didn't know how, and I didn't know why, and I didn't understand how to have a conversation about it. So once I found the book, thanks book, I had a much more clear understanding of why I was feeling that dissonance, because I was able to understand this culture of charisma. I would like to say I've never had that conversation since, but I think we all can relate to having those sorts of conversations in search committees or whatever it might be. We've had that experience. However, with this book, I became a lot more understanding and was able to vocalize what I was feeling about it and try to steer conversations more toward qualification and less personality assessments. And that is really hard for a lot of people to understand, that they are very different things. So as I was growing in my own leadership, this really helped move me forward. Cain asks us to consider how many of these ideas go unheard and how many of our leaders are overlooked just because they aren't as loud. She asks us to remember that leadership doesn't always need to announce itself, and that sometimes the most effective leaders are the ones who make space for others to shine. Ready for a review? So today, we have covered who Susan Cain is and laid some groundwork for the book. I've highlighted some of my key takeaways. Not quite yet, Michael, you can sit back down. Some of my takeaways. Yet there's so much more in this book I have not covered. I barely scratched the surface. She has interviewed so many people. There's so many things in here with her research and her exploration, stories, case studies. There's an entire section on biology and raising children, which I don't know anything about either of those things, so I didn't include them in this talk. She has lots of longevity studies about introversion, really good things that are happening in there. So I do encourage you to read it. It is on the Libby app if you're an audiobooker. Support your local library. And on Audible, Spotify and Audible, if you prefer there. She also has a podcast that you can link to on her website, which is really good. But I do want to, because I wouldn't be great if I didn't ask, where do we go from here? Okay. So Susan gives us some advice for both of our introverts and for our extroverts. For introverts, the first piece of advice is stop trying to fix yourself. There's nothing wrong with you, okay? Just don't. She says you need to develop a sense of entitlement to be yourself, okay? And that just means recognizing that your quiet is not a flaw. It's okay, right? It's a legitimate way to be in the world. Sometimes it shows up in small everyday choices. So maybe you're just not going to go to that social event, or maybe you're going to choose a less stimulating environment. And that's okay, because you just need to find ways that genuinely restore you. Cain also emphasizes that introverts, I forgot to change my slide. There we go. She also says that introverts need to find their sweet spots, or what she calls restorative niches. So after you have engaged in a very overstimulating environment, find a place for you to find yourself again. Maybe it is closing the door in your office for a few minutes between your next meeting. Maybe that means walking around campus alone just to clear your thoughts. Whatever it is, find a space to find yourself to restore. But don't hide yourself from the world. Okay. Cain gives us what she calls free trait theory and explains that introverts can act like extroverts when it truly matters, when you are employed by core personal projects. So maybe that is something that you are incredibly passionate about, you can advocate for. You can put yourself into a more extroverted role. Maybe it's teaching in your classroom. Any of my introverts at the end of a teaching day go close your office door and sit in silence for a minute? Yeah, that's okay. Those are your restorative niches. Act like an extrovert when you need to, but don't overdo it, because that can lead to burnout, and burnout can lead to failure. Extroverts, you're not off the hook. We get advice too. Cain's advice is a little bit different here. It's not less important, but she encourages us extroverts, or omniverts, either way, to, especially those in leadership roles, really, to just be comfortable with listening. Don't be the first one, just listen. She cites that research shows that proactive team members often perform for under leaders who make space for them. So as leaders, stop and make space for your quiet members. Our team, there we go. She also notes that extroverts tend to be really reward sensitive, as we've talked about before. So just take a minute to slow down. You may want to go after that thing, but slow down a little bit and reflect rather than accelerate into whatever is happening. But perhaps most importantly, and the hardest for a lot of us extroverts, reconsider what silence means. Silence is not withdraw. It does not mean that someone is disengaged. It just means that that person might have that biological need for quiet and recharge. Finally, Cain offers advice that applies to all of us. She suggests that best collaboration happens when introverts and extroverts make space for each other and they stop trying to change one another. Might mean that you let people think alone before engaging in a group discussion. It might mean sending out notes and agendas before meetings to ensure that people can get their ideas in order before attending that meeting. And extroverts, that might mean taking a moment to wait and let the quiet ones in the room speak first. My final and greatest takeaway is this. Susan Cain is not asking us to choose introverts over extroverts or silence over speech. She's asking us to notice what our systems reward and what our systems discourage. As educators, it is really important to remember that our classrooms don't just transmit content, they signal the values of our society. When participation is being measured primarily by who speaks fastest or most often, we send a message about what type of thinking matters. Cain's work asks us to consider how many forms of engagement we might be missing, not because our students are lacking ideas, but because our classrooms may not be inviting them to share. Changing our engagement that we use in our classroom does not lower our standards. If anything, it can raise them because you're allowing more time for thoughtfulness. Quiet also reminds us it's not just about students, it's also about our colleagues, faculty, and staff. We experience this same sort of pressure. Meetings reward quick responses. Charismatic voices shape our decisions and our campus culture. Many of us have had that experience of realizing what we wanted to say only after that conversation has ended. I think the most important thing that Cain can give us is that we always need to remember that we need to find our right lighting. For some of us, it is that very bright Broadway spotlight, and for others, it might be a simple, dimly lit desk lamp. Thank you.
Thank you, Holly. We do have time for questions. I would ask that we use the microphone for our friends who are on Zoom today. Does anyone have a question?
Yes, a question. When you speak in terms of introverted, it could be more associated with, I won't say sustainably, little children. I mean, obviously, this is a phenomenon. I was a very introverted child. I was voted the most bashful senior in my graduating class in high school. Then I joined the Army, and they got rid of that.
Yes.
Would you say that being introverted and shy and bashful is more of a childhood, phenomenon? Because I meet a lot of, little kids who are they're a little shy. Sometimes they're not from the country. They don't speak good English, and sometimes they just, they're just bashful. That could be associated with, mental health or just, your little kid.
So Cain makes an argument that it can be biological. So there are some biological factors. And in some of the biological studies that she does, or that she brings up, is that kids that are more reward sensitive, or not even, I don't know, what does she call it? She doesn't call it reward sensitive, stimulation sensitive. So like they would take babies and like shake a rattle, and those that like reacted strongly tended to be more introverted, and those that didn't react at all tended to be more extroverted. So she would say that biologically it can be predisposed, but she also then makes the argument that some of it is very situational. So if you are in the nurture role where you are in a family that is more quiet and introverted, you are more likely to be quiet and introverted. So I don't know that I have a full answer to that because I don't know the biology of it, but I think that there's a few factors that might exist in that.
Could culture play a role too?
Absolutely.
I mean, obviously, American children probably are told to be more,
110%.
extroverted than kids, from
Yes.
culture where you're supposed to be seen and not heard.
There's an entire section about Asian culture and introversion in the book. I did not have time to get into it because there's so much, and I know that my intercultural colleagues can really speak to this, that culture 100%, and Americans truly do deem the extrovert as the ideal more than other cultures. So yes, very good points.
Another question.
One of the points that you put up there was introverts don't try to change yourself.
Yes.
Accept yourself. And I would put a caveat onto that, both for extroverts and for introverts. And that is, don't live with your type.
Yeah.
Live a full life.
Mm-hmm.
In other words, find your passions,
Mm-hmm.
okay, and go out there and put yourself out there and be extroverted for that passion. And then, like you said,
Yeah.
but the same thing is true for the extroverts,
Mm-hmm.
is don't just be an extrovert. Take time to intentionally slow down. It's just as hard to slow down
Mm-hmm.
as it is to kind of do that speed up thing.
Absolutely.
And the best leaders, they really are the ones that understand the value of both.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's what you should look for in leadership is not one or the other characteristic, but their ability to appreciate the other.
I absolutely agree. Yes. Very good point.
I'm just curious your opinion on something.
Oh no.
As a introvert, which if you think I'm an extrovert, then you actually don't know me near as well as you think you do. But that I have always struggled to rectify between how I was raised from an environmental perspective to what I've experienced professionally, not just in academia, but I was raised with the idea that humility was a very important trait. And I've never found that professionally to be something that we value. And it's kind of turned into, you don't sell yourself. You don't brag, what is your opinion about where humility plays into the idea of extroversion and introversion?
Cain talks about this a little bit, about how we value people who talk most about themselves. And so she talks about that a little bit in one of the sections of the book. I think that there's a balance with the idea of charisma, because I think a more charismatic individual is going to be more apt to disclose, and that we think that self-disclosure also makes someone more transparent and likable. So I think that those kind of go hand in hand. Does that make sense? I don't know if I fully answered that. I don't know that I'm not sure exactly if I answered that, but I think that the disclosure part gets really, and it also would depend on the type of relationship you want with someone. So we value interpersonally, and the more self-disclosure and we feel closer to somebody, then we value who they are. I don't know if that's an introvert-extrovert sort of thing, but with our leaders, the more we know about them, the more transparent, the more we will then believe them. So.
Feel like I'm hogging the microphone. Just wanted to say something about humility. A lot of times what we think about humility is putting ourselves down.
Mm-hmm.
If you really want to see if someone is humble, look at how they put people around them up. You don't have to lower yourself to raise other people up. And I think that's the true measure of humility, is raising people up. Again, it's a leadership quality you should look for. If you walk out of that room and all you see is that one person who's supposedly the leader, but instead you see a crowd of people who have been raised up around, you know you found a real leader.
Sure.
Great job, Holly. Oh, awesome. But my question is, was there any mention of gender as far as the judgment of being introvert or extrovert? Because my perception would be that men are maybe judged more if they're introverted, and maybe women, because of, again, cultural expectations and norms, can maybe get away with being an introvert. So just wondering if there was mention of that.
She did not talk a ton about gender in the book. It was mentioned in one of the sections about the communication gap, and how gendered communication does play into introversion and extroversion. But in the majority of her examples and research studies, she did identify more women as being introverted than extroverted in whatever she was doing. So I don't know that she dug into gender maybe as much as we would have liked. She definitely dug more into culture than gender. Here's Michael coming.
Thank you for that really, really thought-provoking talk. I guess I have a question about if the author or if you have thoughts on this, and that's the role of the internet and kind of the rise of this
Absolutely.
asynchronous text-based communication as a cultural driver, and if there's been kind of a follow-up or a thought as to, does that help open spaces for more forms of this, communication, introvert, extrovert, or what is that doing?
So the book, because it was in 2012, did not dig into internet stuff a lot. Actually, I don't even know that she talked about it really at all in the book. I would say, just from my perspective as a communication person, is that I think people are labeling things social anxiety that is actual introversion because of our experiences of being all online. It's not necessarily that you're socially anxious, it's just that you're introverted and you might have that more predisposition. And then because we're losing opportunities to engage face-to-face, we're then having more of that sort of culmination, if that makes sense. So I don't know that there's an answer there yet. I would love for her to do a follow-up, but she said she's kind of done, whatever. Because I think that this has changed so much, even as we started exploring more mental health things with ADHD and things like that, and how does that then play a role in as well. But I think that there could be more follow-up and more research done for sure.
Any other questions?
Hello, my name is Garza. I'm a student here at JUCO. It's my second semester here.
Welcome to the party.
Thank you. And I'm an introvert, I guess. In English class, we're talking about things that make you who you are.
Yeah.
And obviously, I'm an introvert. That kind of makes me who I am a little bit. And my question is, we're diving a little bit deeper into introvert or characters, who we are. And my question is kind of what causes introvertism?
Yeah, so the book talks a lot about how there are two camps. One camp is that you are born that way. One camp is that you are nurtured that way based on experience. So it's that nature versus nurture debate continues into the ideas of intro and extroversion. I even think of my own family. My mom is rather introverted. My dad is like I think, can you be like an extreme extrovert? Like, that's my dad. And so then I think about how I think that mine was definitely more of a nurture space. I learned that from him than it necessarily was a biological space. But who knows, right? So that's kind of where those camps are, is that it still don't exactly know what causes it, or is it simply just this personality trait and temperament that we adopt based on our experiences? So there's nothing really I can give you fully, but there's a whole section on biology if you wanted to take a look at it. Yeah.
Thank you, Holly.
Absolutely.